Hey everybody, it's Joey from Roadmap. Hi, hi, hi. Oh, this V-neck is very plunging. I'm trying to fix it. I didn't realize. Okay. Hey everybody, good to see you. I see some of you already typing in the chat box. So if everybody could just say where they're from, their deepest, darkest secret, the saddest movie they ever saw, which to me was Still Alice, that I saw again for the second time a couple of days ago, and I'm still crying over it. So good. Can you all hear me? Which movie? Date on my first time with Roadmap. Hi, Martha. Good to see you. Hopefully we don't scare you away. Good, good, good. Hello, everybody. We just do this for the whole webinar. Steel Magnolias, and I never saw that, but I get sad very easily, so I try to keep the happy movies on, but I do love me some really heartfelt movies. Cool. Hey, Raphael, A Love Story. Never saw that one either. I need to watch some more sad movies. The Schindler's List. Yeah, that is definitely a very sad movie. Oof. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We have, hopefully you all came to the previous webinar we did with Mario Correa, the writer of Dark Waters, it's hard to say, and it's so inspiring. And I love doing these types of webinars, not only to get advice from these amazing people, but just to get inspired and see people actually get things done, hear about the journey, the trials and tribulations, and just get inspired from it. And I'm not a writer, but I love getting inspired from these amazing people. So Atonement is actually one of my favorite movies. Thanks, Laura. Okay, cool. So what's going to happen is this. James is here. I'm going to pull him into the room with me, and then I'm going to ask him some questions. I have some questions prepared already. I sometimes go on a tangent, so we might not get through all the questions. I definitely want to leave time for you all to ask some questions. So there's a Q&A box and there's a chat box. Thanks, David. The chat box is just kind of, you want to say compliments, whatever, you can put it over there. But in the Q&A box, there's on the screen, you're going to see, that's where you can type in your questions. And I already did that, so thank you. You don't have to do the questions now. I would wait till about 20 minutes in. I'll give you a heads up when it's time to start typing in questions, just in case I ask a question that's very similar to yours. And that's pretty much about it. Try to keep the question something that can benefit everybody. So try to make sure that the answer could be a little general to benefit as many people on here as possible. But okay, great. So let's jump in. So James, I see you on. So I'm going to promote you to panelist. And then we will get started. And then afterwards, when this is done, this will take about an hour. Let's stay on for a little bit, everybody, when James is gone, and we'll talk about other cool things. Okay, so promote the panelist. And I'm gonna ask you to start.
I should unmute and start my video. Okay.
James!
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on. How are you?
Okay. I'm very well. I'm very well indeed. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining in. I'm very, very excited to get to questions and all that sort of jazz. I love doing it because usually what ends up happening is that I learn something myself. So I'm hoping to learn something today. I'm sure I will. Often that can come in the form of something that I actually say out loud as advice to someone else, which actually is advice that I need to be giving to myself.
Literally 99% of the advice I give people, I'm like, you're a hypocrite. Take it for yourself.
Yeah, it's
so
very true.
And you're in London right now, right?
I am. I'm in London. Yeah. So it's kind of just like sun setting outside and all that sort of stuff. So I'm kind of blinds closed, lights on. Hopefully the lighting situation won't get too crazy and you'll all be able to see me. Okay, perfect.
Is that your home base, London?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm Australian originally, as you can probably hear from my accent, but I've been in London for, 14, 15 years now. So cool. London is definitely home. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's jump in. I would love to know, and the writers know a little bit more about you, your journey, how you got started into producing, and then just kind of your journey.
For sure. So like a lot of people, I just loved film as a teenager, was very interested in pursuing that, went to university and did just an undergraduate arts degree, but majoring in film. And the whole time I went through university, I worked as a film critic for a whole bunch of magazines. And I was actually weirdly on very commercial radio, kind of doing, I guess, movie reviews for the equivalent of like a Ryan Seacrest or someone like that. Yeah. In Australia. And so what that meant was that the whole time that I was going to school, I was seeing quite literally every single film that was theatrically released in Australia for that entire period for free, which was arguably more valuable than my schooling, one might suggest. But essentially, I wanted to be a director, like a lot of people. And so I went through school with kind of that goal. My final thesis project was a short film that I wrote and directed called Fugue. And that film ended up doing some pretty remarkable things and traveled really, really well. And one of the festivals that ended up playing was the Berlin Film Festival. And that was kind of my first step off the island, if you will. I went to Berlin. I was given money by the Australian government, and there were strings attached to that, which was that I had to write a report. And one of the things I had to do was go and actually experience the market, the film market, which is housed in a very kind of separate building in Berlin compared to the rest of the festival. And so I went there, and, you know, you can imagine, I'm like in my kind of early 20s. I'm from Australia. I've never been really out of Australia much at all, let alone to a film festival and showing my own film. And the whole thing was just...
Wow, that's so exciting.
I know, it was really exciting. But then the twist of all this was that I walked into the market at the Berlin Film Festival, which for me was this momentously enormous thing of like, oh my God, I'm in this building, only to stand there and observe that everybody else in the building knew each other really well. And I kind of started eavesdropping on some conversations, and it was very clear that these people saw each other on a very regular basis. And it just kind of struck me at that point that I was not where I needed to be. I just felt very strongly that I wanted to be in this mix of people, and these people were seeing each other all the time. And for me, it had been at that point, I guess, 4 or 5 years of uni and film school and all this sort of stuff. And I was in this room for the very first time. And I just thought, something's wrong with this picture. So I kind of made it my mission to get back in that room. And that took the form of moving to London with a lot of credit cards and not much money. And I went to the Cannes Film Festival for the first time. And I accredited myself as a journalist because I'd been doing all of these movie reviews. But when I was at the Cannes Film Festival, I actually stole, I hate to admit, a Cannes market guide, which was like the printed Sanando back in the day. Now it's more a website thing, but it's like this massive Bible, which is basically every single company that's attending the Cannes Film Festival broken down country by country. And I got back to London and I literally opened up at the first page of the UK and I called every single person in that book and said, you know, I'm here, I'm from Australia, I will stuff envelopes, I will make coffee, I'm not looking for anything other than experience and all this sort of stuff, because I knew that there was an icicle's chance in hell that I was going to get work as a director in London. I thought that the lateral thing would be a move into actually the industry side of selling and distributing films. And so I did a whole bunch of kind of unpaid internships essentially in London. And that led to my first paid job, which was as an assistant at a sales company. And it was a very small sales company. So that meant that I was kind of Man Friday. I did like absolutely everything that needed doing. And I loved every second of it until we went to market. So, you know, your job as a sales company is to sell films at market. And then there's these periods in between markets. And what I had experienced was the in-between, which I loved. And then when I went to market and actually understood what selling a movie actually was, it kind of put the fear of God in me a little bit, because what I realized was that we as a company would stay in our crappy little hotel room and play the same trailer on a DVD every half hour on the half hour to, you know, literally just hundreds of people who would come through the office. And I would listen to my boss give the same spiel about the movie and try to sell the movie and all of this sort of stuff. And, you know, it just became, I mean, literally by the end of my first day there, I was like, I am not built for this. This is driving me completely insane.
It was like too, it was too repetitive. It was like too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it was just really, I think for me, and this is going to sound really, really horribly judgmental, and it's honestly not. I think it's just different personalities fit different roles. Sales is a very specific personality.
Mm.
Now, as a producer, I have to, quote, sell my projects by pitching and all this sort of stuff. And I love doing that, but they're my projects. They're like my babies. And this was kind of like real estate or selling a used car in a way. It was selling something someone else had done. I don't know. There was just something about it that just felt really wrong. And so on the second day, I thought to myself, well, you know, I love every other aspect of this job and I love every other aspect of this industry. And so maybe if I just pay attention to what's going on around me, I'll work out where I should be. And what I realized really quickly was that what I should be is one of the people who walks from office to office, having a whole variety of different conversations about different movies and seeing a lot of different movies. And those people were acquisitions people. They were buying movies for distribution companies.
Got it.
And so what ended up happening was that the company that I worked for sold a film to a company in the UK. And as part of that process of delivering the film, I kind of also delivered myself into a job at that company. I have to say, an enormous pay cut. I mean, I literally took a 50% pay cut and ended up under the poverty line, but knew that I had to make that move. Like you tend to get locked into a stream, I think, very quickly on that part of the industry, which is you're either sales or distribution. There's very little kind of movement between the two. And so I knew I had to make that move really quickly, because if I didn't, the risk was that I would be known as a sales guy and I would just never break out of that. And it was kind of not, you know, it just wasn't a fit.
And I'm curious, so from you going to London and to you figuring out that you want to be in acquisitions, how many months or years have gone by?
So I was in the sales job for 12 months.
Okay.
I was in the sales job for 12 months.
Yeah.
And the way that it ended up happening was I actually quit the sales job without another job to go on to, which is, it's one of those weird things that I preach, which is, you know, I understand is incredibly difficult on a practical level. But what I did do was, you know, I realized that it wasn't a fit about 6 months in. And so I started saving every single penny I possibly could, knowing that I had to leave this job because, you know, the nature of a standard employment contract in the industry in the UK was 3 months notice. So, you know, it's not like someone could walk up and say, oh, do you want a job? And I could just jump. I had to be available. And so I knew that I was going to have to hit that point where I really committed, and that commitment would involve being unemployed for a period of time. And so I saved up to be able to do that. And it was absolutely terrifying, I'm not going to lie. But it worked out. And what it meant was that I was then on the buying side. And I think that what became immediately apparent was that the experience that I'd had as a critic, just having seen literally every single movie that had been released for kind of that span of years while I was at university, gave me a really good barometer of what makes a film kind of palatable to an audience, or a film that an audience is going to want to see. And that's, by the way, I think my area of expertise really ended up being art house foreign language films, of all things.
Did you ever see The Piano Teacher?
Yes, I did see The Piano Teacher.
Oh, one of my favorites.
Oh, I'm going to very strongly disagree with you about that movie.
We're going to fight.
But
But the ending of The Piano Teacher, the ending of it though? No, not for you?
I think that Michael Haneke is a filmmaker who takes great pleasure in being very sadistic towards his audience. That's what I would say. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely respect people's love for his work and for his films, but that film is so unrelentingly disturbing that I just can't enjoy watching that movie. It
is something that you're just like
bleak
the whole time.
Yeah. And look, and obviously, you know, that's a clear sign that the film is working. I mean, one of the things that I found in buying movies is obviously you can't just buy movies that you personally like, because, you know, then I would not have bought The Piano Teacher, which was a very successful film. Yeah. What I kind of realized for me was that if I had a really, really passionate response to a movie, then I should buy the movie. And that meant that sometimes I was buying movies that I passionately hated. I mean, passionately hated. But I knew if I passionately hate the movie this much, there's going to be someone out there who passionately loves it as much as I do. And that proved to be a really reliable barometer for a film. I think the worst thing as a buyer was to walk out of a movie and be like, that was okay. You know, if you walked out and you were like, that was okay, and you bought that movie, you were going to lose money. I mean, there was just no question. If you walked out and you were like in love with the film, you know, Luca Guadagnino's I Am Love is probably the highlight of my buying career. Just literally blew my head off, and it was just such a joy to be able to buy that film and release that film. And likewise, you know, other movies. I mean, Winter's Bone is one, controversially, where I was at the first screening of that film and I just, like The Piano Teacher, found it so unrelentingly bleak and miserable and ridiculous. And when it got to the point that she was, spoiler alert, chainsawing her dead father's hands off, I was just like, this is the worst movie I've ever seen in my entire life, which is precisely why I need to buy it. Yeah. Because I knew that people would love it. I just knew. Because every time I've hated a film, other people have loved it. And I'm sure if I went back and watched Winter's Bone again tomorrow, I would see it with completely different eyes. But I think it just speaks to the fact that movies really change when they come in contact with an audience. And it's a really weird experience to watch a film in a room full of buyers, because people quite often aren't really even paying attention to the movie. They're on their phones, or they're literally taking a phone call. I mean, it's like a completely different thing. Yeah. So, you know, you do have those experiences where you see a film that you don't think much of, and then you see it again with the general public and you realize, oh my God, it's become something else. And the film changes. I mean, I get a little weird about this because I believe really legitimately that a film does actually quite literally change at that point. I think when you finish a movie, we all, I think, obsess about the technical details of, like, you've locked picture and you've locked your sound mix and everything, and therefore the movie is finished. But what you find when you show a film to the general public is that the film suddenly organically changes. I mean, I think there are some really specific examples of that in Still Alice, where there are scenes in Still Alice that I know to you play in a particular way and have a particular meaning. And I know, because I made that movie, that it was never intended to be that way.
Oh, give us an example.
Okay, so I'll give you a perfect example. There's a scene in the film.
Mr. Crank.
And I mean, this is the thing where you, I mean, it's an unpleasant experience going to a premiere of your own movie, because I think if you're a sensible person, you enter that experience understanding that the response is completely beyond your control. And however much you may believe or not believe in your film, the audience is going to tell you. And so there's a scene in the film where Julianne is alone in the house. The housekeeper's not there, and she's on Skype with Kristen Stewart while she's making tea for herself. And I'm sitting in the audience and I'm watching the scene, and Julianne goes over to the stove and she turns the gas the wrong way.
Yes.
And the gas blows, and the entire audience just, and I'm sitting there like, what just happened? Like, what's going on? I had no idea what was going on. And I walk off stage afterwards and I say to the publicist who was working on the film, I'm like, you know the scene where she's in the kitchen and she's making tea and the publicist is like, and she almost burns the house down.
I just think the same thing, yeah.
She almost burns the house down. Okay, the reality is that Julianne Moore, being a human being, turned the gas dial the wrong way. That's what happened.
Wow.
And it was the best take of her performance. And so we were like, okay, it's a little irritating that she turns the gas dial the wrong way, but like, we'll live with it. At no point was that ever intended. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
no, it's so funny.
You find things like that, and now even when I watch my own movie now, that's what I see. That is the scene. The scene is she almost burns the house down, but it wasn't she almost burns the house down. It was frankly not doing much as a scene. It was just a kind of check-in between mother and daughter. Yeah, and there were a couple of those through the film. So I do think it's it's a remarkable thing because I've seen the film with an audience probably 15 times, and every single time that scene plays, there is this gasp of horror from the audience when she turns that gas dial. And
it was like the whole scene of her with that, having the scalding hot tea, pouring the tea into the cup. Like when watching Still Alice, like the first time, I almost felt like a little bit of a thriller because you never knew what was going to happen next. It was a slow burn, and it was so, I have goosebumps just thinking about it. So tell us about the genesis of Still Alice.
So it's really interesting. I had produced my first feature, which was a kind of low budget World War II action film, really, which was specifically made for DVD, straight to DVD. It was a straight to video movie. And it came about because I was working as a buyer at a UK company, and I was complaining to my friend that UK producers were not pitching me commercial projects. And I didn't understand this because you could walk into, HMV, which existed at the time, like the local DVD thing, and you could see in the top 20 DVDs, I had probably 5 foreign language World War II movies that I had released in the top 20. And I was just saying to her, when is someone going to bring me a British World War II movie? There's such a great history of British World War II movies. It seems so obvious. And she was like, well, if it's so obvious, we should just do it. And so it was one of those bizarre situations where 6 months later, we're standing on a set in Norway making a movie. It was not a great movie, but it was a movie. And it kind of, as you can imagine, for me, as someone who started out with the belief that I would be, a director, not even a producer, but a director, like someone who'd be in production. Once I had the experience of making a film, I was just kind of bitten by the bug and realized that I had to do more of that. So I was home in Australia on holiday, and I was visiting my sister, and she's a voracious reader. And I just said to her, what have you read that would make a great film? And she walked over to her bookshelf and pulled Still Alice down and handed it to me. And I said, what's it about? And she said, it's about a 50-year-old woman who gets early onset Alzheimer's disease. And I was like, no way, never in a million years, not interested. And she was like, you should read it. I was like, it'll never get made into a film. And it was, that was the kind of buyer, industry, distributor head talking. She said, you should just read it. And I had a Kindle, and I did that thing where you kind of get like a sample, and I got the first chapter, and I read the first chapter, and I was like, this is a really remarkable book. And so I bought the whole book, and I remember very, very clearly, like it was yesterday, I did that awful thing where I was reading the book on public transport, and the train arrived at my station, and I got off the train, but I was kind of so spellbound by the book that I stopped in the door, and all the people behind me were like, get off the train, get off the train. And I just had this, I literally had this moment with myself on the platform. I just stood there and I was like, wow, I really have to make this into a movie. Like I kind of have to check the kind of risk-averse distributor brain at the door and just kind of go for it. But it was really interesting. I had met the filmmakers on a previous project as a distributor, and that project fell apart and didn't get made. But in the process, I'd gotten to know them very well. And I actually had been playing bridge with them, like cards with them on weekends and stuff. And I just had a really strong sense that they were the right people to make the film. And in context, at the time they didn't have an agent even. They were kind of very much old news as far as the industry was concerned, and they were kind of out to pasture. They would have hated me for saying that, but I think it's, the industry is a very brutal industry. And I think they had a huge success with Quinceañera, which won the audience prize and jury prize at Sundance, but the film didn't convert commercially. And then they just got trapped in, that typical development hell thing. And they really just hadn't kind of capitalized on that success. And it was years later. But I said to my producing partner, Lex, who I had made the World War II movie with, I gave her the book and she felt the same way. And I said, okay, it's really easy. We send this to Rich and Wash, and if they want to do it, we will do it. But if they don't want to do it, I don't know how we even get this material in front of people because, in context, this was before Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, before The Iron Lady, before The Help. There was a genuine disgust issue about the older female audience which ironically is now the strongest theatrical audience. At that point in time, people believed that they did not go to the movies, which of course was just a self-fulfilling prophecy. No one was making movies for them, so they weren't going to the movies. But then there was this string of older audience female movies, and I think it paved the way for the success that Still Alice ended up having. So, you know, I sent it to them. They had a manager. Their manager tried to talk them out of it because, you know, it was Alzheimer's and like that's radioactive. I lost my job at that point. We had negotiated the contract for optioning the rights to the book, and we had negotiated the contract for paying Rich and Wash to write. And all of a sudden, both of us were unemployed, and we kind of looked at each other across the desk one day and said, like, it's over. And I just said to, like, you know, we haven't signed any contracts, and kind of legally we have no obligation to move forward, and we can just walk away from this. But that doesn't feel to me like the right thing to do. And she said, no, it doesn't to me either. And so I got on my bank's website and I filled out a loan application in which I completely lied about my employment status. And I borrowed a really significant amount of money to finance the development of the project, with absolutely no idea how I was ever going to make the first payment on that loan, let alone pay it back. And moved on. And Rich and Wash did a really brilliant job adapting the screenplay, and they had previously offered a role in another project to Julianne Moore. It had gotten as far as them having kind of like a cup of coffee social meeting with her. And when she passed on that project, she actually sent them an email, a personal email. And so when they finished the draft, I mean, from the day that I read the book, it was Julianne Moore. Lisa Genova, when she wrote the book, it was Julianne Moore. It was always going to be Julianne Moore. And we got Rich and Wash to email her directly and just tell her that they were working on this. And it was, you know, that is something that you are really not supposed to do, and has massive negative repercussions. Her agent was very unhappy with us that this happened. But it was one of those random things where she was on the last day on set for the remake of Carrie, and she wrapped the movie. She got their email. She went to the airport. She was flying out to, I want to say it was Barbados or something, with her family for a holiday. And Still Alice was in the airport bookstore. And she bought the book and she read the book on that flight. And when she got off the other end, she sent them an email and said, send me the script.
Oh,
and
my God.
Yeah, they sent her the script, and 24 hours later, she sent us an email, and it just said, any day, anytime, use my name to raise the finance, I'm in. And then
this is insane.
And then we had to wait a year because she was a very busy lady. But we were very happy to do that, as much as that was, you know, obviously at the time, that was like, oh, so close now, you've got to wait a year. And we waited a year, and we were ready to go in the following October. And I remember very clearly, I want to say it was August, I woke up one morning and I opened Deadline Hollywood, and it was like, rumor, Julianne Moore to join the Hunger Games sequels. And I was like, that's it, it's over. And what ended up happening was that she went to Lionsgate and said, I need to make this movie. And they carved out literally 23 days in between those two movies. So she wrapped Hunger Games on a Friday, was on the set of Still Alice on a Monday, worked with us for 23 days, 23 weekdays, flew back to, I think it was Atlanta, and was on the set of the Hunger Games the next day to shoot the second part. So, yeah, I mean, when people say it's a miracle that a movie gets made, it's a miracle that a movie gets made.
Wow. My heart is racing. I'm sweating. I have goosebumps all over my body. Okay, I mean, let me just gather my thoughts for a second. That's insane. Like, it really is. Okay, one thing I have to say right off the bat, and by the way, I'm not going to get to any of the pre-screen questions. So anybody who wants to start typing in questions, feel free, because my mind is going all over the place. One thing that I'm so inspired about you is that it's like you are not afraid to take a chance. Like when you feel something like instinctually that something's not working or something's working, or you feel like you have to make a shift, like you act on it. Is that something you've always been able to do? Because so many people can't trust their gut and kind of get stuck. Like, how do you shut out that voice in your head saying, no, just stay where you are?
I don't, is the short answer. I am plagued by that voice. So I'm not going to lie. Those are situations where I know on a kind of, I guess, instinctive level or a kind of intuitive level what the right thing is. And so I commit to that, but it is terrifying. I mean, terrifying. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's fine, just trust, da, 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 da. I mean, I do trust that things happen for a reason and that things work out when you do trust those instincts. But it doesn't mean that the journey to the destination is not going to be terrifying. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, from the point of taking out that loan to the point that Still Alice got made, I came close to literally bankruptcy. I mean, many times. There was one time where I was literally days away from not being able to pay my rent when some money came through. I mean, really like knife's edge. And without kind of getting into like really super boring details, there were business issues behind the scenes on Still Alice, which meant that even when the film went into production, getting paid to make the film was challenging in a way that it should not have been. And so at the point that I turned up in Toronto for the world premiere of that film, once again, I was quite literally days away from being financially insolvent. So it's not easy. I mean, I'm never going to say that it's easy, but I think that if you can't develop and trust your own inner voice, I don't know what you have really, because you are the only person who is living your life. And so if you're not prepared to make tough decisions for yourself, then who's going to make those decisions for you? I think also, you've also always got to be very careful about that balancing act of having ultimate faith in yourself, but also being objective about your own creative work. I mean, one of the things about Still Alice was that the post-production on the film was very, very, very tough. One of the filmmakers was terminally ill and ended up passing away a couple of days after the Oscars. And it meant that post-production ran into some really significant issues, just in terms of the amount of work that had to be gotten through in a period of time. And the film was kind of very radically reinvented in post-production as a result of those challenges. And so, you know, I can tell you 8 weeks through post-production on the film, I was convinced that we had made a complete turkey of a movie. And, you know, that was it. Like, you've gone through all of these experiences and you've trusted and you've fought the battles and you've gotten through the process, and then you just can't believe that you're actually going to deliver a movie that's not good or as good as it could be. So, I mean, I can tell you that process was so tough that when I got to Toronto and I sat at the premiere, what I knew was that I had done my job as a producer, which is to deliver the best possible version of the film that we possibly could from the material that was shot. But I really struggled to know whether the film was good. It goes back, I guess, to what I was saying before. I've seen a lot of people turn up at film festivals thinking they've made God's gift to cinema, only to watch it with an audience and be told they've made a total turkey. So I would rather, frankly, go in thinking I've made a turkey and then find out that I haven't, which was kind of the process on Alice, because it was like trench warfare that had continued right up until literally the 11th hour. And so, you know, I mean, the story around Still Alice is that it was a discovery that year at Toronto and it came out of nowhere and all this sort of stuff. And yes, it absolutely did. That's because we didn't want to show anybody the movie ahead of time because we were still working on it. You know, it's like you're going to premiere a film you've been working on for the better part of 4 years, and you're going to the Toronto Film Festival and the Hollywood Reporter runs its article, which is like, here's the top 100 buzzed about movies at the Toronto Film Festival, and you've made a Julianne Moore movie and it's not on that list. Like, that is how I mean, just people had just counted us out. And, you know, we premiered at the festival at 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. It's a disaster. Just every message that could possibly be sent about the film was negative. But I remember really clearly the night before, I had in the same way of having one of those kind of gut feel moments. I went to a dinner with Lisa Genova, who wrote the book, and all of her family and all of her friends who'd flown in en masse. I mean, there were like 14 of them or something, had come from Boston to Toronto, which was obviously a huge amount of pressure.
Yeah,
and I was at dinner with them, and they said to me, "How's the film?" And I remember really clearly, I was very honest. I said, "I'm so close to it that I don't know. But what I do know is that people have been looking at the film through the wrong end of the telescope. It's like the telescope is turned around and people are looking through the big end of the telescope and they're seeing a really small movie. And tomorrow the telescope will turn around and they will see the movie properly." And I knew, I think that that part of that, frankly, was because once you're in this, and I'm sure a large majority of the people who are on this session are probably very in this in the same way as me, which is that I pay attention to things like Golden Globes and Academy Awards and all this sort of stuff. And of course we know that they're not, you know, some objective determiner of quality or whatever, but just in terms of the culture around that, what I saw going into Toronto was that I had set up a Google alert for my own movie, literally just to know when the world would wake up and realize that the movie even existed. And about 4 or 5 weeks before Toronto, I suddenly start getting this flood of emails about Julianne Moore. And it was because she'd had a David Cronenberg film in Cannes that year, Maps to the Stars, and she won Best Actress at Cannes for that film. And the narrative was that this was going to be her year to win an Oscar. Well, about 4 or 5 weeks before Toronto, Focus Features released that film straight to VOD and disqualified it from the Oscars. And it was like the entire world just came up in arms over the fact that Julianne Moore had been robbed her one opportunity at the, and I just remember sitting there and thinking, they don't know about my movie yet. And, you know, I don't know if I've made a good movie or I've made a bad movie, but I know she's good. Like, the performance was just so unquestionably fantastic. And, you know, I hate to say it, but you see this happen with movies where you get a, let's say, not particularly great film with an astonishing lead performance, and it works. I mean, you look at something like Judy, which I'm sure there are a lot of Judy lovers out there right now, but Judy was not a film that I thought very highly of. But, you know, Renee was Renee. And the same thing with Meryl Streep in The Iron Lady. I mean, The Iron Lady is just an unwatchable dumpster fire of a movie, in my opinion. I mean, that's a horrible thing to say, and please don't quote me. But, you know, it's the first time you see that film, you're just so in awe of Meryl, and it just totally works. And when you come back to it and you look at the film as a piece of storytelling, it's like someone just printed a Wikipedia page out on 90 pages and handed it over. I mean, it's just not good. So I think, anyway, very long-winded way of saying that going into the festival, I had a real sense that Julianne was going to have a moment that was about more than our movie. And if our movie could help and be part of that, wonderful. But there was a whole other thing going on. And it's frankly why we pushed so hard at Toronto that whoever bought the film had to release it that year. Yeah. Because there was just I just knew if they will commit to releasing it this year, she will win everything. And it was really bizarre because I remember in November going to the Hollywood Film Awards in LA, and yes, she did. She won absolutely every possible prize. SAG, Golden Globe, Independent Spirit, Oscar, you name it. I mean, one of, I think, 8 actresses in the history of time to win absolutely every single thing. And I remember going to the Hollywood Film Awards, which is a thing that took place at that time. It was November, and she was given Best Actress for the film, and there was a standing ovation. And I remember turning to Elizabeth, who was the Alzheimer's Association person on the film, and I said to her, "Elizabeth, she's going to win everything." And Elizabeth was like, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about?" And I said, no. We are standing in a room in LA, and this woman just got a standing ovation. And this film has played once in this city, and we were there last night. and it was the general public. It was not this room. Like, these people haven't seen this movie, and they're giving this woman a standing ovation for a performance in a movie they haven't seen. Like, I'm very proud of my film, and I think she deserved it for the work. But all I'm getting at is that there's a living, breathing organism that is the film industry, and there was just this wave of it's her time, and there was just absolutely no stopping that. So yeah.
Wait, can I be your best friend?
Sure.
Yes.
No, I mean, it's you know, I think the thing is that what was fascinating for me was that I was almost having two experiences. I was living out that experience, which was so astonishing. I was also on the outside of the experience because I had worked in the industry in distribution for so long, and I really, truly understood and appreciated what was happening.
Yeah.
Like, I could really see it for the lightning strike that it was. And so I really lived it, everything. I mean, when that standing ovation happened at the Hollywood Film Awards, the next day I booked a flight to LA for every single awards show of the entire season. And people just thought that I was, you know, crazy, or that I'd bought my own press or whatever. And I was like, no, this is not about me. This is about the fact that this is the way this industry works. And there are certain things that you just know. Just like this year, we just knew that Renee Zellweger was going to win all the awards. Sometimes you just know, unless you're Glenn Close but no cigar, in which case,
oh, no. Yeah, that is true.
You know,
yeah,
maybe it does go wrong. But I think the point where we knew really was at the BAFTAs, because the BAFTAs will so often award a British actress because obviously it's a British body.
Yeah.
And Felicity Jones was nominated at the BAFTAs, and we all assumed, I mean, Julianne included, just assumed that Felicity Jones was going to win. And when Julianne won the BAFTA, that was the point where everybody just was like, okay. I mean,
wow.
You know, there's no, yeah, it was a really, really remarkable experience. But I was very, very glad to be having that experience, knowing that it was not an experience that happens, and not to expect that that was the way it was always going to happen. Because I think to have an experience like that on your second feature film, I think for a lot of people who haven't already been working in the industry, maybe for as long as I had, you can buy your own press and think, oh, I did this. You know, I mean, I'm the first person to say I was a conduit for that project. I'm not downplaying the amount of hard work that went into it. I mean, I developed, I produced, I made that movie, but I don't think anyone can intentionally manufacture a result like that. I mean, I remember, sorry, I just give you one more example of this, which was that when the film sold to Sony Picture Classics at Toronto, I called Lex and I was like, we might have made a movie that grosses $1 million at the box office. And she was like, well, you've just gone and put a curse on that. And I was like, but you know, we've made a movie that might gross $1 million at the box office. Like, could you imagine $1 million at the box office? And it did 45. Like, that was after the reviews, after the film had sold. I was like, $1 million would be amazing. You know, it's just, and it's wonderful because then everything is just remarkable. You know, if I'd stood there and said, oh, we might have made a movie that grosses $40 million. Well, then when it grosses 45, you think, oh, great, we got there. But when it does 45 times what your highest imagined figure was, your mind is completely blown.
Well, it sounds like from hearing you, it's like you never had like the finished product and the expectations in mind. For you, it was always about making a good movie from beginning to end. It wasn't like, we have to make this movie, we're gonna get rich off this movie. This is like, this is a good piece of art and we have to make this movie. I think that's a really good point. And it goes to a question that I just saw flash up on the screen, which was a question about what the barometer for new material is. And it's a really, really difficult question to answer because as unhelpful as it sounds, I think so often for me, the answer is I know it when I see it. I think there are two very specific things. One is that I have come to realize that I'm, you know, I mean, this is going to sound a bit woo-woo, but like I am a bit woo-woo about what I do. I'm here to make stories for and about women. That's what I'm here to do. And I
came to that realization, and I take that very seriously, because I think, sadly, a large part of the reason why stories for and about women don't get made is because they are so often from female producers, and the film industry is a hideously misogynist industry, fact, as has been exposed, I would argue. There is something about a male producer bringing forward a story about a woman that makes a difference. And I wish that was not the case. And I hope that it changes. But right now, it's true. And so that's not to say that I would not take on a project that is not about a woman. But ironically enough, I had one project where the lead was a guy, and it was based on a book, is based on a book, and had the screenwriter adapt the screenplay, and then a director came on, and the first thing the director did, who was a male director, by the way, was rewrite the film to be a female lead. And I'm a big Daily Pages person, you know, the Julia Cameron Artist's Way Daily Pages.
Yeah.
I'm very into that. I've never made it past probably chapter 2 or 3 of The Artist's Way. I don't know what it is. I just can't get with it. But chapter 1 is the most life-changing thing I've ever read in my life. And I remember I was doing my Daily Pages when the director rewrote the film as a woman, and I was having a conversation with myself on those pages. Okay, I have 10 projects in active development. 9 of those projects were about women leads. 8 of them were female filmmakers. The one project that I had that was a male lead is now a female lead. Is this something that I'm supposed to be doing? Like, am I supposed to actually lean into this? And of course, the next question is, if that's what I'm supposed to do, then what would be the next thing that I do? Because it wasn't conscious when I was going out. I mean, I don't even really consciously go out searching for material. It tends to kind of come in weird ways. And I was writing, you know, this is 4.5 years ago now. And I said, you know, if I was to actually consciously say, I want to go out and find a new project for and about women, what would it be? And I felt it physically. I mean, it sounds really weird, I know, but I felt this physical thing kind of hit me from above. And I wrote, It Would Be Lucky by Alice Sebold, which is a book about a woman being raped. I mean, it's a rape.
Somebody just asked a question about it, actually. Yeah, I'll ask a couple of questions now from the audience. Oh yeah, I'll do Deborah, because it's a perfect segue. In adapting Lucky, how do you decide what would be the opening scene in the screenplay? How did your vision of where to enter the story differ?
Sorry, what was the latter part? How did my vision?
How did your vision of where to enter the story differ from Sebold's?
Oh golly. I mean, without spoiling things, because the movie was going to be made this year. It's now obviously not, but it will be made. It's casting at the moment, and a really exciting cast coming together. I obviously can't tell you about.
Oh my God, we're best friends though.
The interesting thing about that book, I had the impulse. I then very promptly wanted to talk myself out of that impulse, because for those of you who've read the book, you'll know it's a very, very, very upsetting memoir, in that she comes at her attack head on. Chapter 1, boom, extremely graphic detail, and it's one of the most confronting things that you'll ever read, I think. But what that did for me was it made rape not just a word anymore. I think rape is a word that we use and that we kind of intellectually know it's not okay and all this sort of stuff. But I had never A, been unfortunate enough to have the experience, or B, I did not have, frankly, sick and twisted enough imagination to imagine what a woman could possibly go through in a situation like that. And so that book really changed me fundamentally. It just had a huge impact. And I think that was what I felt that day, was that kind of impact. And it's interesting, the question about the start of the book and how the start of the film might differ, because it's one of the things that tends to happen with these projects is that I'll talk to peers of mine in the industry, and I'll kind of say, you know, as I did with Lucky, and very much the same thing with Still Alice. I'll say, oh, you know, I'm interested in doing Lucky by Alice Sebold. And people say, oh, well, how are you going to deal with the rape? Because you obviously can't start the film with the rape like the book starts with the rape. So what are you going to do? Do it as a flashback at the end, or like pepper it the whole way through and all this sort of stuff? And I'm like, but that would be not, I mean, like that was the whole reason. I mean, the book is wonderful, don't get me wrong, beyond chapter 1. I mean, it reads like a page-turning thriller. It's an incredible book, but everyone wanted to push it away. And I just was not, I really felt very strongly that if I was going to adapt that book, that it had to mimic the structure of the book, which is to say that the screenplay starts with the rape. Now, that said, the rape comes back in the screenplay in a variety of ways that it doesn't in the book. But Karen Moncrief, who's the writer-director on that project, and I both felt very, very strongly that against any pressure to not do so, it was vitally important to honor that and to, you know, I think, frankly, give the cinema audience the experience that we had when we read that book, which is that it redefines instantly for you the term. And so instead of then watching a film where you are using your own mental model of what a rape is when someone says the word, you have lived it with her and you really understand. And, and it's, I think, a really crucial difference. And I think it's shocking to me how few films, theatrical films in particular, have been made about sexual assault, honestly. I think sexual assault has fallen into the realm of kind of a plot point of an SVU episode or something.
Yeah.
I think that it is really, I mean, it's just a horrifying thing to think that the last major theatrical feature film that anyone can remember about rape was The Accused with Jodie Foster from the 80s, which is, you know, why 40 years. I mean, it's insane. But anyway, I had that impulse about that book. And it was very, very well in advance of the Me Too and the Harvey Weinstein and all this sort of stuff. And every single person I know, I mean, my best friend tried to talk me out of doing it. And I think, having had the experience that I had on Alice, what I saw was that the popular culture shifts when it comes, oh, someone's saying A Time to Kill. I've not actually seen A Time to Kill, so that is on my list to see. I was not aware that that's a film about sexual assault. So thank you, whoever that just popped up. And I love like vintage Matthew McConaughey, so I'm there for that. And Sandra Bullock. Why have I never seen A Time to Kill? Okay, anyway. But I think the point is that sometimes the world catches up with you. And you know, at the point that I reached out to Alice Sebold and started having conversations about optioning that book from her, there was not a person I knew who was not saying to me, don't do it. Like, don't do it. Love the book. Don't do it. You're crazy. And now it's a very, very different conversation. And it has been remarkable to me how warmly the project has been received industry-wise. You know, when I was going out with Still Alice, it was a rule that we would not say the word Alzheimer's when we pitched the film. We would pitch the emotional journey of the film. We would pitch a woman who uses her brain for her career and all this sort of stuff. And then when that starts to go away, like, we would talk about the story, but we would never say the word Alzheimer's, because as soon as you said the word out loud, it was like you had said a dirty word and the person's face would collapse and the meeting was over. And interestingly, with Lucky, as these things do take a long time, by the time we finally had the screenplay and I was ready to go out, I felt incredibly comfortable, and still do, saying it's based on a rape memoir. It was a really violent rape in which the man who raped her tried to kill her, and then she pursued justice against him. I have absolutely no issue saying that. And I think, A, that's a wonderful thing, because it shows that the world's conversation on these issues can shift. But I think it's a really remarkable position to be in, because, yeah, at the point that I was talking to Alice about optioning the book, I mean, people would literally, the rape book? Ugh. I mean, it was like a physical a physical reaction. Now, that's not to say it's going to be an easy movie. There'll be a large portion of the audience who flip up their chairs in the first 5 minutes and walk out because it's too confronting, I'm sure. But my barometer on that was sitting with Alice Sebold and asking her, because as I said, I'm lucky enough to have not experienced a sexual assault myself. I said to her, my only concern is that if I was a survivor of sexual assault and I saw a sexual assault depicted as graphically as you describe it in the book in a cinema, would that be triggering? Like, would that be upsetting? Or would you feel like it was validating and helpful in some way? And she felt the latter. Now, that's not to say that everybody's experience of the film will be that, but obviously it's her story, and what she felt was what mattered to me. So
it's kind of like what you
first.
Breaking news. It's kind of like what you were saying before, when you go into a movie, you have such a strong reaction to it, whether it's one way or the other. That's when you know you have a real good project. When there's the emotions could be so jarring either way, which I think kind of goes hand in hand with what you were saying before. Okay, I'm going to ask 2 more questions. For anybody I didn't get to a question, don't send me any hate mail. I'm sorry. Okay, this is from Rebecca Shower, who I think you guys would actually be really good friends. As a woman, it often drives me crazy when people say that a female protagonist has to essentially be a superhero, or they have to act in a masculine way in order to be attractive to an audience. I know that isn't true, but what would you suggest doing to prove them wrong?
Oh my Lord. That is such a tough question. Okay. I mean, really honestly, I feel that the only way to convince people is if everybody makes the collective effort. Which is to say, I'll give you one example. When I was saying just a second ago that we were going out to pitch Still Alice, and I wouldn't say Alzheimer's and all of this sort of stuff, I also could not point to an independent film at the budget level that we were talking about, which was $4.5 million, by the way, for anyone who's interested in that sort of stuff, that had been commercially successful. It didn't exist. It just did not exist. I mean, there were films about Alzheimer's, arguably, so like Iris with Kate Winslet and Judi Dench, or Away From Her, the Julie Christie film, but they really weren't the same thing. Even Amour, the Haneke film, which obviously was not the same thing at all.
Yeah.
Because it was classic Haneke brutalization of an audience, which, I actually really did like that film a lot. But I think this sounds incredibly Pollyanna, but I can honestly say this because it's really genuinely true. One of the greatest things about the experience of making Still Alice was knowing that in the future, people would be able to walk into an office and sit down and say, the comparison for the film is Still Alice. And it made a shit ton of money on its budget. I mean, it grossed 10 times its budget at the box office, which is a huge multiple. It's so important to be able to have those examples that you can point to, because so much of producing a film is convincing people that they're going to make their money back. Because, screenwriting, aside from, a computer or whatever, there's no kind of cost of entry. But when you're making a movie, I mean, it's millions and millions and millions of dollars. Still Alice is $4.5 million. It's a bunch of people sitting in a house crying for an hour and a half. I mean, I don't say that to be dismissive, but I just mean in terms of the scale of what you can actually achieve on that budget level. And the cast, by the way, worked for very, very, very low amounts of money. I mean, it's not that there was some huge portion of the budget went to the cast and it left us with not much to work with. It's just the reality of making a film these days. So I just think that being able to point to an example is so useful. And I think that that's going to be something that takes time. So all I can say is that from a writing perspective, you need to focus on the writing and don't second guess or don't alter the process or alter your character based on what your projected thinking is about someone's reaction to it in the future.
Yeah.
Because, it's much like the conversation we were just having about Lucky, the book. If I had done that, I would arguably have talked myself out of picking up the book. Well, by the time we had a screenplay, the entire cultural conversation had shifted. Mm-hmm. So, what I would say to Rebecca, who asked the question, is you're talking about an issue with female protagonists now, and it's a really genuine issue. I would ask that you take an optimistic view that the world will catch up with you. And that by the time you're going out with your project, that won't be an issue. I certainly don't think you should change your creative process now to try and address a perceived issue that's in the future. That just feels like a recipe for disaster.
And the very last question is, for writers who have a character-driven story, maybe not based off a book or off a book, whatever, what would you say is their first, what the first steps to trying to get it made? Is to get a producer on board first, go write to talent, send it to agencies. What would be your advice to a writer with a naked script, their first steps to try to get it some traction?
You definitely need a producer, for sure. You definitely need a producer. I think people think that finding a producer is some kind of magical process. I think that what you have to trust is that these people are human beings. They're faceless to you now, but they are human beings. So I'll give you a really practical piece of advice, which is just going to sound so basic and redundant, but I promise you, it's a piece of advice. Okay, so obviously I made Still Alice, and Still Alice was a successful film, and you go on the Internet Movie Database and there's my name, and you click on my name and there's contact details for me. I have not had a single person contact me personally.
Well, that's going to change in about 30 minutes.
Now, let me be really clear about this. Let me be really clear about this. What I mean is, email is not personal. Email is not personal until I know you. If your first point of contact with me is email, then we have a problem. Now, this is a slightly different situation because, you know, someone has a project. Rebecca finishes her project and is convinced that I'm the right person. She reaches out to you. She says, would you have a conversation with James? Whatever. There's some way to get that happening, and I'm very open to that sort of stuff. What I'm getting at is I have got a lot of emails over the years of, I've written this film. It's this, would you like to read it? And I'm like, if I'm committing to a project, it is minimum 8 years. That's the life cycle. You know, I'm 8 years now, probably to the day almost, that I picked up the book of Still Alice, and still on a daily basis, I deal with Still Alice as a project in all ways, shapes and forms. You're making a very, very, very significant commitment to something. If I'm going to make that commitment to something, someone needs to, at the very least, track down a phone number for me and give me a call. Like, if you can't make that much effort to get the material to me, there's no, I mean, I'm not even going to respond to the email. Every single one of those emails that I get, it just gets deleted, because I think that, much like I was saying about my own career back in the day, when I stole that can guide, I called every single person. I called them. I didn't email them. There were email addresses. I didn't email. I picked up the phone and I spoke to a human being. Now, 9 times out of 10, you'll get nowhere. But my point is that if you pick up the phone to someone and you talk eloquently about your project and you get nowhere, that's not the person for you anyway. But if your approach to finding a producer is to blast an email to 150 different producers that you've never met before in the hope that someone bites, not going to be successful. And you know, you might get a bite, but you'll get a bite from the wrong person. I think that the entire film industry is about people meeting people and interacting as human beings, and you have to make that human connection. And if you stalk me and you get a phone number and you call me and you say, I'm really sorry to bother you, but this is my name and I've written this script and I'm really convinced it's something for you to do, you know what? I'll read it. That doesn't mean I'm going to do it, but I'll read it. But without that, I'm not reading it. I have 14 active projects on the go. I have a million different things. If you can't make the effort to make a personal connection, then it's not going to work, because the relationship between a writer and a producer, it's a marriage. It's years and years and years. Like, we have to have a kind of personal thing. And I'm such a believer in the personal connection. Like I said earlier, you know, when I wanted to take Still Alice to Rich and Wash, it's because I knew them as people. I didn't know them very well, but I had spent time with them. I had spoken to them, and I just had a sense about them. If I was if I had that book and I was going to go through a process of attaching a director, you know, a lot of people would say, well, get on IMDb, rank directors according to star meter, go through the list, find somebody. Well, they wouldn't have been on the list of the list of the list of the list of the list. I could have gone to every agency. I could have gone to every manager. Their names simply would never have come up. It's a personal connection. That can be scary because those things are so often happenstance. But I think you just really have to trust in those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think something that we tell the writers all the time is that you're a human first and a writer second, and that's the human first and anything second is just like producer second, director second, is connecting on a human level. And James, I wish I could talk to you for 17,000 hours. This was amazing and so inspiring, and it's just you have such a way of talking about your process that it's so digestible. It's not heady. It's not like, what the heck's talking about? Like, it's so actionable and it's so inspiring and it's awesome. And I'm all the people saying thank you for your time. And
yeah,
I'm like sweating right now. This was amazing. If anybody here hasn't seen Still Alice, go immediately and watch it. It is so good. And we'll just be watching you. And yeah, this was awesome. This was amazing.
Great.
Thank you so much.
And you know, I'm gonna put the onus on you all. I want you all to write films about women.
Yeah.
It's just you know, it only changes if we change it. And I mean, guys as well. You know, like there's plenty of women out there writing male roles. I don't know why there aren't more men writing female roles. And as Rebecca said, they don't all have to be, you know, Charlize Theron in Atomic Blonde or some sort of kind of crazy kick-ass action hero.
Yeah.
I think that's what I would kind of encourage everyone to really think about is three-dimensional stories about women. We need more of them.
I feel like Rosemary said something, and then we'll end it. This just kind of encapsulates this whole webinar. Your gut, your instinct, your perspective. Be the change you want to see in the world. Period. And you've done that for your career. You've done that through university to where you are now. It's like you've followed your gut, whether the voices in your head are telling you not to or not, and you've created this change and this movement. So James, you're amazing, and thank you so much.
I'm glad that you got something out of that. And good luck, everyone. I mean, you know, I've written, I've directed, I've produced. I know writing is by far the hardest of all of the parts of the process. So hang in there. Don't beat yourself up in these crazy times if you're not being as productive as you might want. And yeah, I look forward to seeing some of your films someday.
And I will end with this. See The Piano Teacher tonight if you could stand it. And then you email me and let me know whose side are you on, Team Joey or Team Jane. but not with children around.
I'm gonna say skip The Piano Teacher and rewatch Jane Campion's The Piano. That's my speed.
Okay, fine. See both, and then we'll see. We'll do a ratio. Okay, everybody.
Right.
Bye, James.
Thanks, everyone. Have a
Bye.
great